Pass back to
Thank,
yourself, Julie.
thanks, Jamie. That's the wee notification there saying recorded has started too. So today we're going to cover kind of three topics, all tying into the youth voice approach. So we're going to start off looking a wee bit at the kind of methodology around youth voice, UNCRC, and participation. Then we're going to talk about youth voice approaches kind of in the context of the way we work in CLD. And then we are going to talk a wee bit about the regional approach that we've developed recently in Forth Valley and West Lothian across schools, CLD, and kind of wider community settings. So that's our aims for today in the next 90 minutes. And yeah, hoping for as much engagement and discussion as we can. And I know sometimes digital can be difficult, but we are really open to anyone putting comments in the chat, popping your hand up, anything like that, to just have some discussion as we go through. So our team in Education Scotland, our CLD officers team, have recently been awarded the CLD standards mark, which we worked very hard to try and achieve for our professional learning. So this means that by participating in this session today, you can record it as 1.5 hours of professional learning time, which can contribute to the 35 hours a year pro rata, which is required for membership of the CLD Standards Council, or if you're a member of another professional body or your own learning and development plan. And when recording your professional learning, you might want to reflect on your development from this event or any other events that you're taking part in as part of Winter Learning Festival and relate it to the relevant CLD competencies and ethics. So we're just going to start off kicking off thinking a wee bit about the UNCRC. I know some people were at the other session yesterday where we encountered some technical difficulties yesterday in our session, but you'll be glad to hear that Jamie is our team's digital guru. So he is very happily able to help with all matters digital for us today. So yeah, hopefully if you were here yesterday, we'll go a bit smoother than that. So the UNCRC covers 54 articles. They're completely universal and unconditional. There's no um, responsibilities or conditions attached to children and humans more broadly having our rights. Rights are also inalienable, inherent, and they are all interlinked. They depend on each other to be successful. And one of those articles that we'll talk about in a lot more detail today is Article 12. Next slide, please, Jamie. Thank you. So when we're talking about the UNCRC and rights more broadly, there can be this kind of common misconception that rights have to be linked with responsibilities, and this isn't correct. So this is a Mythbuster quote that we use from Children's Parliament, and it says that children's rights, like all human rights, are unconditional. This means that there's no conditions attached to the rights. Rights can never be a reward for the fulfillment of a responsibility, and they can never be taken away because a responsibility hasn't been met. And we sometimes encounter some difficult conversations when we're talking about rights and separating them from responsibilities, because in previous kind of iterations of Curriculum for Excellence, rights and responsibilities were linked, were often taught together. So it can be quite a move for some people to try and detach the two and separate them, because really responsibility is quite a perceptive thing. What I deem as somebody being responsible might not be the same for yourself. So really trying to detach the two of them. So we're going to move on to look in a wee bit more detail at Article 12. So Article 12 of the UNCRC is seen as a kind of gateway right. It's an underpinning right that if this is in place, other rights can then come into play. If we don't have Article 12 being upheld, it's difficult for any other rights or articles to be respected, protected or fulfilled. So Article 12 states that every child has the right to express their views, feelings and wishes in all matters affecting them, and to have their views considered and taken seriously. This right applies at all times, so this could be during immigration proceedings, housing decisions, or within a child's day-to-day home life. So it's really Article 12 that we're going to focus on today when we're thinking about youth voice and the importance of hearing and considering and taking seriously children and young people's views. So you might be aware, and certainly those that were here yesterday, this is quite a similar few slides around the UNCRC being incorporated into Scots law. What this will mean is that public authorities will be required to fulfil their duty in areas of responsibility of their decisions, their actions, and also their inactions. So this will have the effect of creating accountability and empower children and young people. If their rights are not being fully respected, they can, if they choose to do so, seek to pursue that through the legal system. And really, what this is aiming to do is to support a kind of cultural change around rights in Scotland and supporting children and young people really to be heard and have their rights protected, respected, and fulfilled at all times. What it doesn't mean is that individual people will be kind of, you get images of people being hauled through the courts for some kind of rights breach. It won't be personal people, it won't be individuals taken to court at that level. It'll be about the public authorities and their duties and their kind of overarching bodies that would be challenged. So just moving on to the next slide, we've got a wee graphic here of where the incorporation is at the moment into Scots law. So you might recall it was a few years ago now that there was the unanimous agreement within our Scottish Parliament that MSPs wanted to incorporate the UNCRC into Scots law, and that was challenged in Westminster by issues around devolution. So this wee diagram on the side here, you'll see where that challenge started, then ended up at the Supreme Court, of which the Supreme Court agreed that 4 aspects of the bill went beyond the powers of the Scottish Parliament. So it's come back to Scottish Parliament, and it's been worked on for quite some time now to make sure that when it goes back through Parliament again, it's not challenged again by Westminster. So there's been lots of legal kind of to and fro's around that. It's entered what's called now the reconsideration stage. So the Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee have been taking evidence on amendments. And the organisation Together were part of civil society evidence on the 31st of October, and there's some really good clips online of that if you're interested in watching a bit of that evidence in Parliament. The Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, Shirley-Ann Somerville, she then gave evidence on the 7th of November, so momentum is building again. We would hope to see this go back through Parliament pre-Christmas, ideally, which would mean that it could become an act of the Scottish Parliament by summer, because there's a 6-month period where it goes for that kind of royal assent into becoming an act. If we don't see it before Christmas, it's definitely something to keep your eye on for early New Year to hopefully see it come through Parliament and come into the kind of legal system. So that's where we're at with that. If there's any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. I don't know a lot of the intricate detail around it, but can certainly point you in the direction of some further reading on the Scottish Government website and things. Happy to find out as much of it as I can if there's any questions around that. Thanks, Jamie. So part of making sure that we are recognising children and young people's rights is thinking about impact assessments. And you might be familiar with kind of health and wellbeing impact assessments or quality impact assessments. There might be things that you already use within your workplace to assess and understand how decisions can affect something. So quite frequently we use equalities impact assessments within our roles. But something to supplement that is a children's rights impact assessment. Quite often we hear it referred to as a CRIA, and it's a tool that helps people understand how a proposed law, policy or decision might affect children's human rights. This purple image here is from a Together Scotland resource, and it's about supporting the use of children's rights impact assessments in practice. There's a couple of helpful wee videos of them talking through how to use them and the guide as well. So we'll share a link at the end to a wait clip which contains all of these things that we've talked about all in one place. But we definitely recommend, if you're interested in knowing more about impact assessments, that's a good place to start. I think for me it's a really interesting one when we see council decisions at the moment. There's lots of things around leisure centre closures and I was just reading on Twitter before this session, there's a youth club challenging a decision that's been made as well. So it's just interesting to think about, are these being used widely? What it's just a really interesting space to be in at the moment when we're thinking about the decisions that are being made in terms of the cost of living, and lots of things going on globally as well in terms of children's rights and the impact that decisions make are having on children's human rights. So yeah, I could go on about that for a while, but I won't. Next slide, please, Jamie. Thank you very much. So moving on to think a wee bit more about participation and how we help children and young people to really claim Article 12 and claim their voice and have their voice and their views given that due weight that they are entitled to by the UNCRC. So this is a Lundy model of participation. Some people might be familiar with Laura Lundy already. She's based at Queen's University in Belfast and produces a lot of really interesting work around children's rights and participation. So this model, she talks about space, voice, audience and influence, and these four elements interlinking to make sure that children and young people can have their views expressed, given that due weight and heard by the adults around them. So thinking about space, that could be things like safe spaces, welcoming spaces, accessible spaces, and really supporting children and young people to be in a physical environment and space that they can feel safe and inclusive to give their own views and opinions. In terms of voice, that can be things like supporting children and young people to be able to express their views. We were delivering a similar session a few days ago around children's rights, and we had a practitioner talking about working with children who are non-verbal and how that voice element can be so different in different settings. So that's a kind of key element there. Audience is a really interesting one, I think, about listening to views. I think sometimes as adults we can be guilty of hearing children and young people, processing it, and then a decision happens and it wasn't what the children and young people said. And sometimes that kind of feedback loop doesn't close if children and young people are saying, but we told you that such and such. And yeah, audience is a really important element there, as well as influence. So making sure views are acted upon as appropriate. And it's not to say that, Dundee can't have 12 swimming pools, that if young people want 12 swimming pools, but it's being able to go back to the young people and explain why decisions have been made and where there's elements of what they've said being taken into account, and being able to discuss things with children and young people such as budgets and restrictions, and just being kind of honest and transparent, I think is really, really important in terms of this model. Again, there's lots more online. She's got some really helpful kind of checklists and evaluation support and things as well in terms of using this model in practice, which can be really helpful to look at. So something else that we considered when Jamie and I were starting to look at Youth Voice in Forth Valley and West Lothian was around the ladder of participation. Some people might be really familiar with this ladder, and there's lots of other kind of models and methodologies around participation, but this was one that we used because when we were working between schools and communities and CLD settings, we were really trying to have something that was kind of understandable, that everybody could relate to, and we felt that this kind of did the job for that. And to ensure that children and young people are involved and incorporated and consulted, we kind of came to this standard agreement of theory, and it's quite a well recognised and understood approach. Hart's model was first published in 1992. It has 8 rings and the 2 main zones, which he calls non-participation and degrees of participation. So the non-participation element being those ones in red, they are around manipulation, decoration and tokenism. The top 5 rungs that are in the participation zone all represent different but valid forms of participation, while those 3 ones in the red there, they're kind of determined as the non-participation elements. And it was been quite interesting to think about our work and where in different places we might have been at different rungs on the ladder there as well. And just moving on to these to highlight these 7 golden rules. So the Children's Commissioner for Young People and Children in Scotland published the 7 golden rules for participation, which can be a really helpful tool or resource if you're thinking about how participation looks within your own setting. And the 7 golden rules talk about supporting children and young people to understand their rights, offering chances to be involved, but remembering it's my choice as a child or young person if I want to participate and offer my voice and views. Number 4 is about value, and 5 is support. Then supporting children and young people to work together. And finally, number 7, keeping in touch. So that feedback element. So again, tying back into that Lundy model about audience and influence and making sure children and young people know what's happened with their voice as part of various consultations or activities, really closing that loop again. So again, that's accessible online, and we'll share links to access it as well at the end. Okay, great. So we pause to think about barriers to participation, because it's all fine and well us talking about the theory and how it can work really well, but we know that in real life and realistic settings, sometimes genuine participation can be really difficult. And this is an image that we use quite often to talk about the difference between equality, equity, and social justice. And you'll see there's different kind of barriers, physical barriers in that picture there, and thinking about some people need more support than others to be able to realise their rights and to be heard. Um, Although they do still have a wire fence in front of them. So I feel like we almost need a fourth picture on the end where there's no fence at all. Um, but yeah, just kind of a wee pause here to think about within your own setting, have you encountered barriers to participation? It can be really difficult to support that kind of genuine element in the kind of world and the context that we're working in. So please feel free to pop your hand up if you would like to come off mic and chat, or pop any thoughts in the chat box. Have you come across barriers to participation within your setting? Promise I won't name and shame anyone or put anyone on the spot. Um, but yeah, do we see barriers to participation in our contexts? Transport, Caroline. Yeah, absolutely. In terms of children and young people being able to access opportunities, feel free to come in and tell us a wee bit more about that if you'd like to.
Well, obviously the free travel has really helped with that, but it could be the cost, financial barriers, but also, yeah, just there isn't any buses in your village or your place to get to an event. So trying to think of how you can, yeah, uh, uh, what's the word? Diminish those barriers. So,
Absolutely, yeah. I was at a session with young people and they were talking about rural kind of bus routes, and one of the young people was saying, well, if I don't get the bus home at 4 o'clock, I don't then have any other option, so I can't stay for after school activities or youth clubs. And yeah, absolutely, really, really important point there. Yeah, I see Paul talking about location, rural areas as well, absolutely.
I mean, there's a whole range of barriers that do exist when it comes to young people and children participating in sharing their voice. Uh, Obviously, location and transport's one, but other ones do exist. One that always kind of rings true for myself is that idea of like not knowing or the information to participate. So where to get involved, who the groups are that they can speak to, or who the people are that they can speak to. Um, that kind of rings true as well, Caroline, that understanding the issues. Sometimes the issues are highly complex or they're not fully explained in a way that is young person or child friendly. So these can really limit how children and young people engage successfully in sharing their views.
Yeah, absolutely, Jamie. And I'm just picking up on what Leslie's popped in the chat there as well. Not enough time given to children and young people's participation given the time to understand the processes, timeframes, etc. Yeah, I think you'll notice time comes up. I was just about to say time and time again, and that felt like I'd planned it. But time comes up so often when we're talking about genuine approaches to participation, and Jamie and I know that ourselves really well, given the length of time it took us to get the kind of regional approach off the ground in Forth Valley and West Lothian, because we wanted to do it right. And yeah, it can be really difficult in a culture where we're constantly on to the next thing. And yeah, totally. And picking up on what Caroline's saying around confidence, confidence and knowledge on being able to participate and support to participate. Can see there's a few people typing, so I'll just give it a wee minute. Yeah, ICT and computing and digital, yeah, huge differences across the country of what is provided and is on offer, and especially when we think about rural areas having access to the internet and Wi-Fi and devices, everything can be a barrier in terms of that digital access, funding or resources to undertake good quality participation and involvement. Yep, definitely. An investment in supporting young people to access opportunities. Yeah, absolutely. So it isn't always an easy feat. But Jamie, if you're okay moving us on to the next slide, we're just planning to highlight, so where voice makes a difference. We've just talked about rural difficulties, and as we know now, we have the free bus travel for under 22s, and again, for some young people, that was a really difficult thing to access in terms of having the Young Scot card and all the forms that were associated. And we had a colleague that it was saying that he'd been asked for, I think it was like his pension details or something like that, something really that was actually quite difficult to find. So yeah, there was additional barriers associated with that, but it's been a great thing to really open up that free bus travel for children and young people. And again, children and young people having votes at 16. These were both Scottish Youth Parliament kind of motions that were supported and upheld. So it's been great to see on that national level where voice can make a difference. And what we wanted to do was have a wee think about where voice can make a difference in your own setting, or where it has made a difference in your own setting. So coming right back down from these national big hitters around bus travel and voting, but have a wee think, where has voice made a difference in your setting? Is there a time where a young person has supported a campaign or helped to make a change, or you've had a group of young people working on a particular issue? Could be a group of adult learners that's worked on a particular issue, something around where's it made a difference?
Maybe we try to think of that idea. We're not talking about even like big colossal ideas. It doesn't have to be sort of locality wide. It could be a small change where something has changed thinking or changed the approaches that have been used in a establishment. So again, is there an example for where youth voice has made a difference in your service or in the work that you or your colleagues have done? Have you seen that anywhere?
We stopped a mosquito device being put in a local
yeah.
theatre a number of years ago, which is probably a human rights issue as well as a youth voice one. So, that was something that they were obviously gathering outside, public space, a public building, and obviously causing a bit of issues. But the idea that they then put this device in, there's a whole lot of issues. So they had a group that stopped that happening. So that was positive, but that was some time ago.
That's great to hear that, Caroline. I talk about those mosquito devices all the time, so it's great to hear. Children and young people have a right to free assembly, so yeah, absolutely great to hear them stop and doing that. Paul, in you come.
Yeah, I don't know whether they've made a difference at the moment, but our planning team have really done quite a lot to try and get young people involved in the local development plan. So they've gone into, which is a kind of potentially a dry subject, but really important. That so they have, from the very beginning, they have sought to, you know, find out where young people are. Well, they know they're in schools, but they've actually gone out to schools and, you know, and sort of, well, not sort of, they've been, you know, consulting with them. Now, I can't say that's make a difference yet, but, you know, that's hopefully going to make a difference. And I know that most of the people in the planning team, and they're really keen. They were always keen to get young people involved. So I think, I'm not saying they didn't do that before, but they definitely, you know, I think they're making much more of an effort. And it may be because there's some younger people in the planning team. I don't know, but you know, that's always good, I think, for somebody
Yeah,
that's at the other
absolutely.
age range.
No, that's great to hear that. It's
Yeah.
really great to hear that. And like you say, has the potential for being a pretty dry subject. So, and it's great to see where that'll go and to find out how young
Yeah.
people's involvement will maybe have shaped things differently.
Yeah.
It's great. It's great to see the comments in the chat there, Kevin, saying around young people shaping and scoping participatory budgeting processes and deciding how to allocate funding. Great to see that. Leslie, the new shop front opening 101 at the centre in Livingston, really another really exciting development there. Gordon, Fife Research on Hope for Change. Really great to see these things. Diane, young people forming an advisory group to shape our new youth vision report. And Leslie, our skate park is going for heritage status. That's brilliant to see those things, and it's that kind of hope and those kind of positive differences that we need to hang on to when sometimes things can feel a bit tricky. Caroline, campaign for free sanitary products. Yeah, I know a lot of that has been led by young people, and so important. So absolutely, thanks so much for participating in that. And Jamie, I think I'm handing over to yourself now, am I?
Yes, thanks, Julie. Really good examples there, and obviously we can see, broadly speaking, the difference that youth voice can make when it comes to things that are national, but also things that can happen in localities and in local areas and local settings. So what we're moving on to now is looking at that idea of voice, approaches, and context. So we've covered the kind of the broader aspects of what voice is, and how it's utilised nationally, and like kind of the guidance that's there nationally, and where it kind of has made that sort of difference. And what we're going to do now is drill down a little bit, and when it comes to within context and situations, how voice is normally kind of constructed. So the ideas and how it's formed in different situations, what the groups are made of, and how these sort of groups inform like decision makers. Because as we all know, when it comes to decisions, be it locally elected members, be it committees, be it funders, be it like in school situations with teachers, etc., they always are asking for what do children and young people think. And it's the kind of methods that they utilise to engage with children and young people that sort of inform their decisions to make those decisions take forward. So in our first sort of thing, we think about what are the youth voice structures that exist. So some of these will be quite common. So we have like youth forums, slight typo there in the forums, but youth forums, pupil councils, we've got ambassadors for different sort of topics, such as mental health. Some schools, for example, have like leadership ambassadors or SCQF ambassadors, but we also have ambassadors out in the community, facilitating different roles. Thematic groups, so groups that exist for like LGBT, things around about mental health and well-being. Sometimes if it's around the climate or climate change, these thematic groups exist in their own right, and they're given like a role to support their peers, but at the same time to advise and guide. And then obviously the Scottish Youth Parliament, which you'll all be aware, the elections are taking place just now, and I know there's some issues with that, but they are a structure that exists when it comes to youth voice. And normally the way these structures exist is you have these groups of young people or children, and you have a member of staff that support them. And that practitioner, whoever they may be, has a duty and a role to fill. So when we look at the kind of structures in their entirety, it's usually a community of children and young people. So they have similar ideals, similar values, similar ages, similar kind of life circumstances, or it's a community of geography where they all live in the same area or they're part of the same establishment. So again, they're involved based on a kind of commonality. Their involvement's also based on interest or selection. So again, they've chosen to be involved in these structures. So again, if a young person wants to be involved in a youth forum or a pupil council, usually they've put themselves forward. But sometimes it's done through selection, such as voting or nominating through like a group or a class or an area. So that process does take place as well. They are normally consulted on their views and opinions in regards to a particular theme or issue, but also they're involved in the creation of ideas. So when it comes to what is the things that we need or what should we be able to do for our area or community, if something's changing, how can we make it better? That's usually the group's kind of ambition is and their drive. The member of staff is often a facilitator of this. So they are a facilitator for the participation for voice. So the idea is that they are the ones that bring the children and young people together, give them the things that we discussed previously in the Lundy model. They give them the space, they give them the time. They are the ones that kind of offer that opportunity because, again, for children and young people to form themselves, they need a little bit of support sometimes based on like buildings and travel, etc. Like things we've already discussed. They are a trainer, they are a motivator, and they are a connector. That is their role, to motivate children and young people to do and to advocate and to speak up, but also to form connections between their peers in those groups, but also to train them on what is being part of some structure like this, what is the duties, what should they be thinking about. And ultimately they're an advocate for those supported. So again, if you have ever been a practitioner for like a youth forum or a pupil council or any of these kind of structures, you will know you often speak for them and say the pupil forum thinks this or the youth forum thinks that, because again, you might be in the situations with other colleagues and have that opportunity to share that. Or again, facilitating that opportunity for them to share them as a group. But there's this kind of question that often comes up when we think about youth voice or the voice of children and young people. Whose voice is it? Whose voice is that the one that's being shared? If you have a group of 8, 9, 10, 15 children and young people, the voice that's being shared is theirs, and ultimately the views that are being shared is theirs. I've had extensive experience working with pupil councils, youth forums, different individual groups and projects, and I often know that children and young people that are part of these groups will often say, well, I think and I believe, and this is my view, but we're not really sure if that's the representative view of their peers or the ones within their given area. So in this image here, you can see all the individuals below, they're slightly greyed out. These are the ones that have an opinion as well. And what do they think about a topic? What do they think about something being changed, like a park being taken away or a new school being built or access to, different routes that are available for like cycle paths, etc. These are the kind of things that they would have an opinion for as well. And these are some of the questions that come when we think about these different groups and also the key staff that are involved in supporting them. So there's issues there of time and what the staff can provide if it's difficult to do so. Personal opinions, if that member of staff thinks that they might know best or they think that their opinion might be the right one to go down, sometimes not deliberately, but again, they know the landscape a little bit better in regards to what they're trying to inform. Maybe confidence in these roles. If a member of staff is supporting a group of children and young people, maybe it's something new they've not done before, maybe they're unsure of the purpose or the actions that will be taken as a result. Maybe there's frustration because they know that the views of the children and young people aren't being taken forward, or again, they're being met with barriers. But then that group of young people as well, maybe they see no change, maybe they don't understand things that have already been said, the information that's been given to them, maybe they feel rushed, they're being asked, in 2 weeks' time, can you give us your view on this? And they don't really know what the thing is, and they don't really feel like they've got time to discuss it fully, because again, they still are children and young people, they still have other responsibilities in their life, and they might have other time pressures or other commitments, and maybe they just don't know. That's always a barrier when it comes to consulting young people and children. And then those that are on the peripheries that are not involved in these youth voice structures, they ask those questions. I have a voice, does it matter? I don't know where to go to share this. Where does ideas go? No one's going to explain it to me. So there's barriers that exist at all three levels when it comes to making sure that voice is fully represented. And that's something that's often a challenge that we find when working with practitioners across CLD, across education, and across the third sector organisations. And it's something that often poses a great challenge when coming to making sure that children and young people are fully represented. So with that in mind, I want people to kind of say and have a wee kind of comment in the chat, or even just join in, again, via your hands, and thinking about what does youth voice look like in your context. So that can be in your particular working environment or the area which you represent. So what do your youth voice structures look like? What are their makeups like? Are they similar to what I've just displayed? Do staff support and exhibit the challenges mentioned? I think time was already mentioned before. And are there always the same voices present? Is it always the same voices that are being asked? So with those kind of questions, if colleagues would maybe like to think and just even put one or two things in the chat box if they agree with this, or again if they think that something's different in their kind of setting, just to maybe sort of put their hand up and come in, just for a sort of wee kind of 30 seconds, a minute, to just sort of say if there's any particular views, because I'm quite curious to what it looks like in different situations, or if it is again very similar. And that can also be like with the establishments you engage with. So again, if you work with schools, how does it look there? If you've done supported youth events, how does it look there? Is it similar to that sort of standard model that exists?
I think in East Lothian, we've had youth sort of councils over the years that have come and gone, and I've never been that convinced that they were that effective, because people had to come together. You had to equip them with what the context of what they were doing, and they often had to travel. So there's lots of issues and barriers that and then they moved on because they have other things in their lives. So unless you're involved, so we look more thematically now at, well, you're interested in sport, or so it might be the pump tracks that we're consulting on, or health, or so the thematic ones for me seem to work better, and linking in with pupil voices in schools or other contexts. So, and obviously Youth Parliament do questionnaires, and there's 101 questionnaires at the moment that are going out through various routes, whether it's local development plans, strategies, etc. So I suppose it's trying to join their dots with some of these things more effectively, so we're not asking them twice.
And I think that's a really good point, Caroline, the idea that these groups do come and grow, and there's a whole amalgamation of the asks that are being tabled, and that can sometimes be quite overwhelming, and the period of time that children and young people are involved in these structures can be quite short, which can be also a challenge as well. Jude, I'm just your point you've raised there in regards to often the same young people speak out and volunteer. Is that something you find that happens quite consistently in the kind of work that you do, or the kind of work that you've been involved in?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it's just like adult populations. There's people that are active and some that have got other things going on or interested. So a bit like people who put themselves forward for the Youth Parliament, there has to be a certain element of confidence, and you've got to build those things in. So thinking of creative ways to sort of maybe get new people involved, or ask in different settings. We got the Play Association who were involved in the primary schools for the local development plan, and they were looking at place, and so that was quite a look at creative ways of getting the voice rather than perhaps some of the more traditional routes.
Absolutely. And that is the main kind of message that we have discovered as well, that these are the kind of the barriers that exist when it comes to making sure that the voice of children and young people is very representative. Just looking at your point there, Leslie, LOIPs and SIMD areas are going into primary schools, but it's one-off. What you don't like the ideas in one session. Yeah, because of supporting young learners with critical thinking, absolutely. So that sort of, what is the action? How is this consistent? How is it like a process that's involved regularly? These are all big questions that we've sort of engaged with, and hopefully when we kind of touch upon our model going forward, and we're at Forth Valley and West Lothian, it can answer some of those questions that you're flagging up. I just want to move on and just to highlight some of the views from colleagues within education as part of our professional learning team. some of the professional learning that takes place, there's a practitioner inquiry, and practitioner inquiry focuses on different things, but one of the practitioner inquiry themes is around pupil participation. And I thought it was quite good to highlight some of these quotes, because these are teaching staff that have led a piece of work on pupil councils or pupil parliaments in schools. And it's interesting to see that our colleagues in education often feel quite similarly to ourselves. So that first one there, it says obviously the time to make a major change wasn't there, and obviously the views that were consulted were sort of broader. Second quote is in regards to that sort of, it went well, but the ownership of it. So it wasn't felt like it was the duty of like the school as a whole to consult children and young people, but it was something that was just one member of staff's job, which again defeats the purpose of making sure it's fully consultative. And again, that final one there, when it came to pupil voice, it demonstrated that there was a need to give time and space for learners and also staff to kind of give that sort of feedback. So when we talk about those kind of key words there about role and responsibility, when we talk about time and we talk about space, and we talk about that sort of like greater impact, these are difficulties that are also felt within other elements of the system. And then you may not know, or you may know that there was a thematic inspection conducted by HMI back in 2019 about pupil and parental engagement and involvement. And some of the points that came from that were around areas of improvement and recommendations. The areas of improvement were to build on current approaches, focused on that idea of to continue to increase children and young people's opportunities to lead their own learning and contribute to school improvement, and also to involve pupils, parents and partners more. And obviously that was 2019, so I'd be curious to see if those areas of improvement were something that was grown in from your own reflection within the work that you do or in other parts of the country. But recommendations that were ultimately said from that were the idea of promoting parental and pupil engagement and decision makings, meaningful co-production of policy and improvement, engaging staff and school communities further in discussions, what authentic pupil participation means in local contexts, and ensure staff are supported to deliver their skills to overcome barriers to pupil participation. So when you see these kind of statements, again, it's not just practitioners, it's through inspection that these kind of statements are coming from. So we know across the piece that these are some of the areas that need to be improved and some of the recommendations that are being met. And I think it's important to highlight this, because ultimately when we think about the work as we do as community learning development practitioners, it's good to know that there's a strength and a foundation there to build upon. And that's some of the kind of stuff that we built upon here when it came to when we developed our approach in Forth Valley and West Lothian. So I'm just going to take a wee breath there, and we think about these ideas. When could we create an approach that allows all children and young people to have the ability to have their views captured? Can we create consistency between methods used between schools, groups, communities and organisations? Could we make simple guidelines and resources that are easy to use? And finally, can we allow practitioners around this theme to learn from each other and provide support? That was the kind of the questions we wanted to ask when it came to like, how do we make it different? And when we look at that idea of like the sort of bigger discussion, how do we make sure we're representative and it's more democratic? So with that in mind, some of our thinking when it came to develop an approach within Forth Valley was the idea of peer representation. And that was children and young people who empower to advocate for their peers. That idea that we've not got the separate group anymore that represents others because they volunteered or they've been selected, but they're involved in discussion with their peers. And this model is that idea of them going out to sort of have discussions and sort of identify what the big issues are and consulting the big issues. The reason why there's power in this is because the view is more than just the individuals in that group. It's the views of everybody. So again, if you were thinking this within context, it would be a youth forum that would be going out to different youth groups and youth clubs, even those that are not local authority led, like scout groups, for example, and consulting young people in those situations on a particular common theme. And again, in schools, it would be a pupil council or a thematic group there, consulting in classes or consulting in different situations. The power of something like this is you get children and young people asking questions on different themes, gathering views that are wider than just themselves and analysing the findings. And that could be supported by, again, these members of staff to really delve into a piece of research of what are the views on a topic. So if that topic is something locally or regionally or nationally, then the views are more than just a few voices. It also means that the views are research informed and the decisions made are more accurate. So if you have that kind of group of children and young people who are part of some sort of youth voice structure, they've consulted their peers, they've researched the information, it means the information going up the way to the decision makers is more relevant. So if something needs to be decided that's continued or stopped, if a new idea has been suggested, it can be sort of vetted, or where money is spent, how that money is spent, or if it should be spent in a different way. There's much more strength there because it's the views of many instead of views of just a few. And then we also think about, again, these practitioners that support all these different youth voice structures. So we've got youth forums, pupil councils, committees, boards, thematic groups. They're all supported by different key staff. And that's the sort of term that I'll continue to use. So that could be teachers or youth workers or any CLD staff that are responsible for supporting these things. But unfortunately, what often happens is these staff work in silos. They're often separated and they don't connect with one another, or the groups don't even connect with one another. So you could get a pupil council and there's no representation from that on any sort of youth forum or thematic group within the community. Or vice versa, there's a youth forum that is representing the views of a locality, but again, they have no connection with children and young people in a school establishment. And the staff that support these can often find themselves disconnected and also very kind of siloed in their approaches. But what if these staff were to be connected with each other and form connections? Would this make youth voice stronger? Imagine these key staff knowing who each other were, having the space and time to kind of connect and ultimately have discussions to form opinions on what was really different or what was the kind of correct mode of travel when it comes to involving children and young people. And then what this would create is a culture of non-tokenistic approaches. So all these staff working together on the same sort of ideals, having the same principles and resources and guidance. So the idea that they're all working off the same set of principles and direction, and there was no sort of dubiety to it. And the difference this would make, well, all the children and young people they work with, they're ultimately part of these groups and structures, and then they ultimately consult their peers, and then ultimately the staff that are involved in supporting them are all working on the same sort of mantra. And it means ultimately those decisions that affect them are more led by a wider audience and more consistency. And this is the sort of approach that we've looked to form our approach in Forth Valley and West Lothian, which we'll talk about in detail, but this is just to give you an overall look at it. So what I'm quite keen to do at this point is take a little pause and thinking about that peer representation and that sort of discussion. I would like to invite colleagues to have a little think about it and to see if this is something that would present challenges and opportunities. So that idea, if you have a model where you have children and young people consulting their peers on a given topic, you have key staff all working together and working to the same principles, and then advocating and allowing children and young people to share their views in a much more holistic way. What are the challenges for this and what are the opportunities? So what I was thinking is I would like to do this in a small groups of maybe 2 or 3 people and just sort of short breakout rooms, because I think it's quite hard to share our views in this way, just for 5 minutes to sort of share those challenges and opportunities. So what I'm going to do is just ask each room to kind of discuss these kind of key questions and what are the challenges and opportunities such as a model like this, and is it something that could be beneficial? And when we come back, we'll go into what the Forth Valley and West Lothian approach is and how this looks to make a difference in sort of the region that we work in. So I'm going to just open the rooms just now And if anybody gets stuck, just come back to the main lobby and we'll get you into the room you're meant to be in. So hopefully you had some good discussion there. I'd like you to hold on to the kind of thoughts from that discussion, because we're going to just move on to presenting our model in Forth Valley and West Lothian, which is based on all this, just to kind of see what you think about, to share what we've been doing, but also maybe to see the correlation in the work that you would hope to do within your settings or hope to see within your settings. So within Forth Valley and West Lothian, we've got this model, which is a regional youth voice approach, and ultimately it's involved all these different councils. Julie, I'm just going to pass to yourself if you just want to introduce the approach and just talk us through maybe the start and how it came about.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jamie. I was just talking in our wee breakout room there about how this approach has been quite some time in the building of getting us to this stage today. So initially I started this role in Education Scotland 3 years ago, and Jamie started about 2.5 years ago, and at that point in time it was already in existence in our Regional Improvement Collaborative Plan that they wanted Youth Voice to have a stronger kind of role in discussions around decisions that were being made regionally, but also those kind of local and bigger national decisions as well. So it's been kind of in the building for quite some time. And as we talked about at the start, to try and ensure as genuine and as non-tokenistic approach as we possibly could, it took time. So you'll see there kind of wee pictures there of our Forth Valley and West Lothian regional improvement plans over the past few years. Our Regional Improvement Collaborative at the moment is looking at learning, teaching and assessment, and hopefully we are looking at how this approach can be used in the context of asking children and young people about the learning and teaching that they receive. So with children and young people really at the heart of what we are doing, this is the approach we came up with. And Jamie, I'll hand over to yourself to talk through the 3 kind of core parts.
Yeah, so basically, when this was first derived in the regional plan, we didn't really know what it would look like. We were very against the idea of how there might be like a representation or like a regional youth forum. We're against that because we thought, well, that doesn't really represent children and young people in the region. So the first things we did was we established a development group of practitioners that were leading on youth participation. We engaged with those practitioners and young people that were involved in structures already, and we looked to involve our colleagues within the RIC and also strategic leaders, because we knew this needed to go beyond just groups that existed in CLD. It needed to go into wider education. And it was ultimately at this point, by involving all these different aspects of learning when it comes to education and otherwise, we came up with the concepts of what this approach should be, and it had sort of 3 parts. Julie, you want to go through the 3 parts for us?
Yep, so we established that a framework would be essential for leaders and practitioners to follow, because we were recognising that in CLD we look at youth voice differently in terms of pupil voice in the context of schools, and we really did not want it to be your stereotypical pupil voice child or young person that was being asked these things. We really wanted a completely different approach to that, so we thought, right, we need a framework, and we worked with the Youth Voice Development Group, with the practitioners within that, to develop this framework. So thinking about things we talked about earlier around UNCRC, the Lundy model, the participation ladder, making sure that we could articulate exactly why this approach was the way that the group wanted to go. We also created a resource that could be used to provide meaningful and non-tokenistic approaches to youth voice by using that peer research model that Jamie was talking about earlier. So having young people that are skilled up to go out and conduct a piece of research with their peers on a particular topic and feed that back in, so that it's not just a really limited number of children and young people's voices being heard. And I know we're talking here Forth Valley and West Lothian, but that resource, that toolkit that we've created, will be accessible to everybody here today as well. And the third part of that was the charter, which was developed by children and young people, and that set out the key statements on how they expected adults to consult with them.
So as we go into these parts, we're just going to go into each a little bit more detail, and we'll explain what their contents are. We'll start with the guidance framework. So the guidance framework is essentially for practitioners, staff, leaders to know how to conduct youth voice in the correct way. It has these kind of contents within it. So the vision, outcomes, and why we use the term youth voice. Again, to kind of consolidate that difference between pupil voice, learner voice, etc. We talked about the different models that exist in Forth Valley and West Lothian, how staff should support those models, the process in which they capture the voice of children and young people, and ultimately taking action as a result. Also presents a lot of the policy landscape that we've discussed here today. The idea behind this document is if you're inexperienced or not confident as a practitioner in facilitating youth voice in any shape or form, you can lift it, read it, and feel quite comfortable within Forth Valley and West Lothian about the way it should be done and the processes that others are using, and also the structures that already exist. Some of the key actions in this framework talk about the idea of having our charter, which we'll talk about and show you, embedded in every single establishment, in every setting, in every sort of setting of education. All practitioners being part of a network. So if you are a youth worker or a teacher that facilitates any youth voice structure, you should be part of a network of similarly like-minded practitioners. Having a development group that's a strategic body that guides this work and supports it and makes sure it stays true to its form and true to its meaning and process. And then a drive in regards to practitioners using the resource that we've developed here to facilitate good quality youth voice, and again to empower children and young people to speak for their peers. And there's a visual graphic here to kind of highlight how that would look, and it sort of draws upon the graphic that we've shown earlier. So we've got a youth voice development group that has CLD and education within it. They are the strategic group that administer this approach within the region. The key staff that are involved in each of these structures, such as pupil councils, youth forums, thematic groups, will be part of a youth voice network, a local authority-wide one. So one in Falkirk, one in West Lothian, one in Clackmannanshire, and one in Stirling. And again, the development groups will support. So the Stirling members will support that youth voice network within Stirling. And what this guarantees is that the kind of principles of our approach stay true. And if there's new staff that come in that are given this role, they can become part of that network. And if they're unsure about anything, then they can be coached and supported to get to the same level. It also allows continuity with all these different youth voice structures to make sure that the views are captured, or the consultations that are being done are all done in a similar way. And again, you can see that by the graphic at the bottom, with the development group supporting the network and those network staff supporting children and young people for their voices to be heard beyond what affects them. The next part is the charter, which I'll give to Julie.
Thanks, Jamie. So the Youth Voice Charter was the second element of the approach, and it was really, really important that we agreed on these kind of guiding principles on how children and young people wanted to be engaged with and consulted on when their views and opinions were being sought, because we know that a lot of these sometimes consultations can be tokenistic, they can be rushed, that kind of thing. So we really wanted to have this charter in place to recognise the collective voices of children and young people and to really honour their views. So it's for any practitioner or leader that organises, plans or delivers youth voice activity, and we launched it in September, and we've seen it being used across school and CLD settings already, which is really great. We are just going to outline the journey that we went on to create the charter. So going back to March last year, we had the initial kind of formation of that regional youth voice development group, and in September we kind of culminated all of our ideas around what this regional approach could be, and the development stage kind of really began. In February of this year, we created the kind of guidance framework and those plans for the charter. We shared that with education staff really widely, including the directors of education across the local authorities, to make sure that this approach was not going to come as a surprise to anyone, that people knew the momentum was building and that we could really bring people on the journey with us. In April, we met with young people to start drafting the charter, and the way we did was we had done a Google form which had over 650 responses across the region, and had been asking children and young people questions about consultation, about when adults are asking them questions or consultations on any kind of theme, what did children and young people want? Like, what was important to them? So when we met in April with this group of young people from across the 4 local authorities, they distilled down those 650 responses. They put things together, they tested out different sentences, they really worked on how this charter could be relevant and accurate, and we left everything kind of up to them in terms of the distilling down those 650 responses. Then in May, there was further development of the charter, which concluded looking like this. So we had many options, different graphics, colours, etc. And this was how it concluded. So very much children and young people leading the way with telling Jamie and I on how it should look. And it has 10 statements. Our favourite one is the one at the bottom. Young persons told us we are collaborators, not consultants. And that was a really key theme throughout all of our discussions. They said, remember, you know, we're not a consultant, we're a collaborator. Treat us as an adult. So really great to see that kind of taken off now, and it's visual across some schools and settings already, which is great. These are just a couple of statements that are in the charter, so we just made them a bit bigger so that you could see them, but we'll share the links as to where everything's accessible afterwards if you want to look in more detail. But young people told us it was really important that when they're being asked questions, it was personalised, all of the information was there, it was clear, double check we understand. Give us time, again, coming back to time being so important. We need time to understand and work at our own pace, give us ways to share, let us do it privately, publicly, and plan it. Plan to speak to us and don't leave things to the last minute. And when we've spoken with colleagues kind of across the region, they've said, yeah, you know, that can be a really difficult thing for if you're in a setting where something feels quite rushed. And finally, take action and give feedback. So that closing the feedback loop that we talked about at the start of the session today, making sure young people know in a way that makes sense to them why or why not a decision would be made. So give us real feedback and allow us to do the same to you. So they're just a couple of the statements from the charter itself. And it's great to have our directors of education have all bought into that and signed that, which helps again keep building the momentum.
And our final part of the resource, or the kind of approach, is our Empowering Youth Voice research, which is essentially a toolkit that empowers children and young people to consult their peers. So like we discussed earlier, how do you support children and young people to do that? So we, through the support of that team of practitioners within the region, created this resource that could be used by any practitioner working with any group, so they can get children and young people to that level. The resource itself is really simple. It's in a sort of PowerPoint format with notes. And essentially, if you are a member of staff that works with a pupil council or a youth forum or a thematic group, you can lift it and utilise it and get the kind of participants you work with up to the ability where they can consult their peers. The main contents of it are these kind of sections here. So there's a bit about understanding what youth voice is, a little bit about rights, about making the idea of becoming a team. A lot of the work is about understanding what research is and how to conduct research, again, on a very child and young person friendly way. And then identifying a theme to conduct research on and the tools you need to do it. And then undertaking that research, the practice of asking questions, what kind of questions are important, how to have trust, how to understand data, and then ultimately presenting that information and analyse it in such a way that it can be shown to others. And we always like to highlight this is a model that we've not just created ourselves, it's been developed off a model that exists in Stirling Council, which is the Social Justice Ambassador Programme. That currently runs and has been run for quite a number of years now in primary schools, secondary schools and in youth groups. And the success behind this is essentially it does that same thing. It empowers children and young people to consult their peers in social justice. So we worked with the practitioners that created it alongside the other local authorities to develop it to a youth voice approach. So we know it works fundamentally because of where it's kind of been conceptualised from. So as Julie's done there, she's put a link in the chat of where all this lives on our RIC website in the section on youth voice, so it can be accessed by anyone at any time and sort of like utilised in any shape or form. But when we delivered this to leaders of education and leaders within CLD and wider, we asked them to make a pledge, and this is the pledge they are holding, and we are supporting for that implementation across the region. And it's these kind of 4 statements. It's the idea that the guidance framework is read and shared and recommended across different youth voice practice. It's the idea that the charter is shared and upheld in every school and educational setting, council, department, third sector organisation and community group. And again, we've seen that being embedded quite strongly. We have groups of young people that are established as a youth voice structure that will not work with other departments of their local authority until they sign that charter. So it's a powerful piece of document. We've got schools that show this at assemblies and say this is the way we will work with you when we share your voice, and it's been shared with parents. And the reason behind the charter is because it's the principles. It's the principles of how youth voice should be conducted, and that's the kind of the main mantra behind it. The third point there, we're looking for that pledge of connecting with practitioners to implement the youth voice resource, which you've already got. We've got youth workers that are running it with their MSYP candidates as a group, or their champions boards, or their youth forums. We've got schools that are looking to implement the resource in their pupil councils and pupil parliaments, to again mainly see how it's ran and sort of start that implementation process. And we've done huge consultation on how this resource has been received by children and young people. We've been to schools and youth groups to say, what do you think about the resource? Does it work? Does its content work? And we've took extensive feedback to say, yes, it's acceptable and made tweaks as a result. So it's not just again created by us, but it's also been reviewed by children and young people. And the final part of this whole approach is the development of youth voice networks. Some networks kind of exist in some authorities, some don't exist at all. So that's a job for us to support in Education Scotland, but also with our youth voice development group to implement, again, to have that continuity of approach across the region, but also in each local authority. So we're underway in doing that at the moment, identifying practitioners. We're speaking at head teachers meetings and youth worker sort of team meetings, etc. To show that there's that commonality between CLD and education across the piece, and also third sector partnerships to develop those networks. And ultimately, when we come to that is the approach that exists. So when you sum it up, we've got a charter that says, here's how it should be done. We've got a framework that advises and guides practitioners on how the approach is and exists within the region. And we've got a resource that anybody can lift and deliver upon. And the idea is that in time to come in the future, that everybody will be utilising that resource, everybody will be implementing that charter. And it means when consultation is done on any theme, if it's on a locality basis, on a national basis, or a regional basis, it means the process is consistent because it's based on these kind of key elements. We're working with other partners to make sure if it's a bigger topic, like if it's something national, then where the views go. So we've got some sort of national partners looking to be the platform that does that. So again, if children and young people are consulted in a school by their peers on something national, those views will be digitally captured, so they'll all go to one place. But ultimately, the kind of process at the starting point is to make sure it's implemented correctly, and that's our sort of Forth Valley and West Lothian approach. We've came to the end of our presentation, so hopefully you found some of that information useful. We just kind of like to take this point to ask any sort of, to give you the chance to ask any questions about any of this, about obviously the methodologies we've taken, the approach in its entirety, but also would like to kind of allocate this time for you to do a wee quick evaluation via the QR code or the form link there, which we'll paste into the chat as well. While we're doing that, is there any sort of discussion that took place in the rooms, or any sort of questions anybody has about the Forth Valley approach that you would like to ask? Then just please jump in, come in freely, or put your hand up, or put anything in the chat, because like Julie said, we've been establishing over the last year and a half that it's taken a long time to do, but we're now at a point where I don't think there's any pushback against this from like leaders in education, from directors of authorities, from youth workers, CLD sector staff, etc., third sector organisations. It's very well adopted in its sort of implementation journey. So be curious to hear if anybody has any particular views or things they want to ask, or any sort of thoughts. Just come in. Leslie?
Yeah, Hi. Regeneration worker in the West Lothian Council. I suppose looking at it from my perspective, which is outside the youth perspective at the moment, but always keen on having worked in youth services in the past, is how it all links with community councils in the area, you know, and the wider sort of community and locality planning, you know. How it all links there. And I think I would have liked it if there was more mention of it, or, you know, so it's embedded into it. Because I feel that it depends where you sit within the council. So we don't sit under, although we're all under education, we don't sit under the education CLD side, so we miss out on a lot of this. So again, it's just to ensure that we capture it all when we're pulling this all together.
Yeah, it's a good point, Leslie, and we've had other colleagues that work in sort of community regeneration and community development highlight that question, like, well, how do we make sure that we have the same sort of way to consult children and young people? And when we developed this with the support from the practitioners and the children and young people, it was never designed to be something that was education centric. It's not about improving just education, it's improving the lives and outcomes of children and young people. So the charter and its existence can be used in any situation. One of our colleagues in Falkirk, I think, is planning to work with community councils and use the charter as that sort of principles of how you will engage with us and how you will engage with the children and young people in this group. But beyond that, when it came to, like, if you want to consult on particular issues community-wide, that's why the Youth Voice Development Group's there. So one of your colleagues in West Lothian Council is a member of that group. And one of the things we'll do when we're sharing the slides is make it clear who's involved in that Youth Voice Development Group, because again, we know as this starts to get implemented, people will be saying, how do we consult children and young people in X, Y, and Z? And the Youth Voice Development Group is the way to make sure that that information is sort of like sort of received, so there's a kind of point of contact in staff, but also that the principles and approach is done in a consistent manner. So I'll send all those contacts out so you know who it is for West Lothian. Any other questions while people are doing their evaluations? Or any other observations from like what was saying in the room earlier?
We have our wonderful colleague Una with us, and oh, Una, great time, and Una's just popped her hand up. And you come.
I really enjoyed that. I know I've heard you speak about this before, but it bears listening to several times, I think. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. I suppose the thing that's going through my mind is to get buy-in across the whole region, to get the momentum that you've got going to have achieved what you've done. Who were your allies along the way? Because I think, you know, certainly in smaller local authorities, some of the obstacles that we might come across might be too much for, you know, one or two workers or leaders to get around, and it might falter and fail. So who were your key allies to get this much more strategic buy-in?
Our key allies were a couple of people. One, it was a member of staff or members of staff that were the sort of responsible for youth participation within CLD. Secondly, it was the staff that were in education that had some sort of responsibility for pupil voice. UNCRC had that sort of on their remit. Our colleagues within our collaborative, our regional improvement collaborative, were allies in that as well, and making those connections. Our attainment advisors, so again, you may or may not be aware that each local authority has an attainment advisor. We're keen in supporting those kind of connections with, again, if there was members of staff in the authority. Once we identified names, however, that was, you know, that was the initial kind of catalyst to it all, because again, we felt that most practitioners that we spoke to were quite keen to deliver on this piece of work, and then bringing everybody together. So again, having everybody on that same page and developing it all together, that was kind of key. So they were the sort of the key ones. And then as soon as we had that buy-in, it meant convincing like directors of education and chief executives of local authorities. That was easier because it was all done in that way, and it was done with the practitioner support, but also it was done based on the kind of the views of children and young people that we had, and also the structures that were involved in supporting or advocating for those views. But I suppose that's why it took so long, because it involved all those kind of connections to be developed. Brilliant. So I'm just going to leave it there. So that's our contact details. So hopefully you found today useful. If you at any point want to get in touch with myself or Julie, then please, do not hesitate, because we're quite keen to make sure this goes beyond our region at all times. But hopefully you found it useful, and like we've said, we'll be sharing the slides and all kind of necessary links within Forth Valley and West Lothian, if you're within Forth Valley and West Lothian, and all the information from today. But hopefully it's helped your thinking. Hopefully it's helped your sort of direction of travel when you think of your own journey, your own authority, and hopefully it's given you some ideas for what things can be done when people work together on this one thing.